A man in his profession couldn't afford to make friends unless they were in the same profession, but even then, competition would get in the way. It wasn't as easy getting into the wing of the nursery, but Leonard was resourceful. He discovered which women had the care of Frederick's heir and picked the night nursemaid as his target. Helga was her name. She was a plain-looking young widow with an infant of her own that she was still nursing, which is why she'd gotten the palace job. It took him only a week to woo her into his bed during her brief visits to her family in the city. But then he was a personable young man in his late 20s, somewhat handsome with his dark brown hair and blue eyes, and he even dredged up some old charm from the days when he hadn't been a cold-blooded assassin. He was going to have to kill Helga, too, if he wanted to be able to retire in his homeland. If he let her live, she would be able to identify him. It took Leonard another 3 weeks to arrange a rendezvous in Helga's room in the palace's nursery wing on a night when the other nursemaid had time off and wouldn't be there. Even though she had assured him that no one ever visited the nursery at night, other than the 2 guards who made their rounds twice nightly, she was still fearful of losing her job if he was somehow discovered there. After all, the number of guards stationed at the palace was doubled at night, but passion won in the end, and the right doors were left open for him. He only had to remain hidden briefly until the 2 guards left the nursery wing. He didn't kill the woman after all. That had been the logical thing to do. He had used yet another fake name with her, not to hide his intended crime, but to prevent her, or anyone else, from connecting Leonard Kastner and Rastabon. He had no intention of hiding his crime. Whoever had hired him would need to hear of it, and there was no reason to kill the nursemaid too, when he could simply render her unconscious with a sleeping potion in her wine. He had a moment's regret even over that. He'd actually grown fond of Helga in the month he'd known her. It changed his original plan quite drastically. It meant he wouldn't be retiring in his own country after all, when she would be able to identify him. But it was a hasty decision made just today, and the only sleeping powder he'd been able to find quickly was unfamiliar to him, so he didn't know how long it would last, forcing him to hurry. But worse, he couldn't bring himself to kill the child there in the nursery where the woman would wake up and see it. She adored the king's child, claimed she loved it now as much as her own. Leonard had intended to finish the job on sight, much less risk involved, but after glancing at Helga lying on her bed, soon to wake, he began looking for a sack instead. There were none in the main room. The royal infant was being raised in the lap of luxury, fed with golden spoons, a bassinet worth a fortune, lined in satin and the finest lace, circled with gems. A shelf was filled with fancy toys the baby was too young for. Numerous bureaus lined one wall with so many clothes she would outgrow most of them before she could be dressed in them all. There were no cots for the nurses to sleep on. They weren't allowed to sleep while they were on duty, which was why the princess had 2 nurses. Each had a small room attached to the nursery where they slept when they weren't on duty and cared for their own babies. In a corner of the nursery, Leonard saw a stack of pillows of every size imaginable, which were probably used when the baby was allowed to play on the floor. Leonard grabbed one of the larger ones from the bottom of the stack, cut it open along the seam and pulled out the stuffing. Then he cut out 3 small air holes. It would serve his purposes. He lost no time stuffing the child into the pillow casing, though he did so very carefully so as not to wake her. She was nearly 4 months old. There was a chance that if the baby woke she would cry. He had 1 long hallway and a narrow corridor to traverse to reach the stairway to the side door he'd entered from, and 2 guards to work his way around. Easy enough to do as long as the baby didn't cry. The previous night he'd secured a rope to the fortress's back wall, which faced away from the city. He'd left his horse near there tonight in a grove of trees. He'd made these preparations because the fortress gates were closed and heavily guarded at night, and he needed another avenue of escape. But the fortress walls posed another challenge. Although Lubinia wasn't at war, several guards